So this video is an attempt to reach out to other INFJs who have had negative experiences with a narcissist or anyone on the antisocial personality disorder spectrum. I am an INFJ who grew up with narcissist parents. My mother was very much a child to me. She coerced me into mothering her. I always had to make sure that her feelings were okay and that she was comfortable and not the other way around. I was very much objectified by my parents, and I think ultimately their children, my brother and I, were status symbols. We're more status symbols than actual human beings. While we grew up with the privileges of being an upper middle class household, we didn't experience any love. We weren't cared for. Our emotions weren't mirrored. And that, in spite of a lot of privilege and comfort, it was a very uncomfortable and unpleasant experience growing up with narcissist parents. Antisocial personality disorder is a spectrum, and I'm very hesitant to even really emphasize the differences of narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths, because I think they're all on the antisocial personality disorder, which means they all lack remorse and an ability to empathize. It's just the only difference is the degree to which they harm others to benefit themselves. I've encountered narcissists on both ends of the spectrum, and I would classify my parents as the narcissists that are on the lower end of the spectrum. There was no physical or sexual abuse. It was just a lack of love and care, emotional mirroring, and sort of an objectification of their own children. Their children were meant to be status symbols, and it was a one-way relationship, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So my parents were slightly different. As I'm saying this out loud, as I'm about to say this out loud, I feel that my mother could be perceived as sort of a more severe narcissist, but really I felt the effects of both my mother and father were equally harming. So with my father, it was just he didn't have an interest. He sort of showed a lack of interest in his kids, and he could be very rude and cruel with what he would say to us, and he would make comments that would damage my self-esteem, and I would tear up or express a feeling of being hurt, and I would want to heal that, and I would want to make it better, and he would just leave the room. He would just walk away. No reaction, no effect on him my emotions had, and he used to call that tough love, but I think that's total bullshit, because tough love is a tactic that you use when all else fails. When a child doesn't respond to other forms of child rearing, isn't able to be disciplined for whatever reason, the child themselves isn't able to show remorse. Tough love is sort of a last case scenario, and it's a tactic. It's not a way of being. So when all else fails, you can show a little bit of tough love, but it's not like when you have a very sensitive, quiet, and caring, well-behaved child, you never show any kind of affection toward them and call that tough love. It's just being an asshole. It's just not taking an interest in your child. But yeah, he used to just make me feel like I couldn't do anything, like I wasn't intelligent. Of course, at 10 years old, I don't have the knowledge of someone at 50 years old or 45 years old. of course, I'm not going to be able to debate that person on equal terms. Of course, I always felt like I was stupid, inferior, and that was what I would call like an ambient trauma. Like, it wasn't like one intense event that shattered my conception of reality. It was just lots of little events over time that stopped me from being able to develop to my full potential, because I was being given these messages by my father that I wasn't loved, I wasn't okay, it wasn't okay to make mistakes, etc., etc. So I consider that a form of narcissism. I'm a little bit of an armchair psychologist. I do not have a degree in psychology. However, INFJs are often called nature's psychologists because we're strong in the realm of abstract thought, and we're very reflective, and we very naturally and easily come up with insights about people. I did a lot of research on narcissism and the effects that it has on the victims of narcissists, and reflecting upon my experience as a child, this is what I have come to realize. Now, my mother is different because I think you could argue that she's a little worse. However, when I reflect back on it, I feel that they sort of had an equally negative effect. So my mother, not only did she not mirror my emotions, look at me, attune with me, and tell me, like, this is what you're feeling, and it's okay to feel this with me right now. Like, not only did she not do that, in addition to, putting me down like my father did, she took it a step farther, and while she was not willing to do any of that with me and for me, I was expected to do it for her. So if she was not feeling okay, I had to be the one to make it better for her, and to talk her through it, and to hold her emotions, and to understand her emotions. Now, what is our auxiliary function as an INFJ? Extroverted feeling. So needless to say, I had a very hyperactive extroverted feeling function, I think because of the relationship I had with my mother. It doesn't help being a female in a patriarchy where you're expected to please men and to dress a certain way, to be very polite. So society and my family was the perfect environment to create a hyperactive extroverted feeling function. And of course that crashes, and ultimately having narcissist parents led me to depression and social anxiety, but I'm going to get to that later. A parent-to-child relationship is very much a one-way relationship, unless I have this mistaken, where the parent gives to the child, and the child doesn't really have to give anything back. They're just a child. Now, it's bad enough that if that relationship is compromised, where the parent treats the child as if they were an equal, as if they were an adult. But my mother took it a step further. It wasn't like we had a friendship that was mutual, where she was there for me and I was there for her, but it was definitely a one-sided relationship where even if I had a negative feeling, she took it as an offense to her. So this was a reflection on her as a parent. If I had a negative feeling, it meant that she was not doing her job as a parent, and that hurt her ego. So when I felt a negative feeling, it made her feel extremely uncomfortable, and she blamed me. So it was like she was communicating to me, how could you make me feel this way? How could you do this to me? How could you make me feel like I'm a bad parent anytime I had any negative emotion? Now, they say defense mechanisms are bad, and you want to eliminate them, and that's true as an adult, but I believe as children, they're all that kids have, because if kids are in a dysfunctional family, they can't really be expected to have the kind of abilities that adults have to reflect on their own actions and change them. And really, they can't change them, because if you are in a relationship with your parents that is extremely negative, and the parents are never gonna change, there's nothing you can do but leave. Like, as an adult, if you're in a bad relationship where that person is treating you badly, the only thing you can do is leave, and you can't leave as a child. That information is too much to process. So defense mechanisms are very, very adaptive for kids. It's just the cost is high, because while some kids with functional families and families that mirror their emotions and guide them into development, they have an advantage over the kids in dysfunctional families, because they can spend their time on the path towards self-actualization. They don't have defense mechanisms to slow their development. Now, the kids who do have to use defense mechanisms, and rightfully so, are not spending that time developing themselves. They're spending that time protecting themselves. But it's the right thing to do, rather than at a young age, as a young child, realize, oh wow, I have another 10 years of this where I can't leave the house and I have to deal with this. I am not loved. There is no love for me. I do not understand my feelings, and of course I would not be able to have the ability to understand all of this. But that information emotionally, let alone intellectually, is too much for a child to process. So because this information is too much to process, the child develops a defense mechanism. And for me, this defense mechanism was to fantasize, to go into my own fantasy world and escape, and to go into a world where I was loved, and when something was wrong, it was addressed with somebody who cared about me and was capable of attuning with me and loving me and showing care and affection and mercy. And while I got angry at my parents, and I showed anger and resentment and being enraged at their lack of response to my feelings, it never came to anything. And so I developed kind of a little bit of a Stockholm kind of thing, where it's like, well, I'm going to be here for another 10 years. I might as well just live in some fantasy that they love me and I love them too. And all of that is a big bubble, and it bursts. So basically for me, that led to depression and social anxiety. And I think that's extremely common for anyone with narcissist parents. It's a road to depression and anxiety. It's really, I don't even think it's avoidable or a choice or there's anything you can do. It might lead to some other problems. Maybe it's not depression, but it's something else. Anyway, maybe that person develops narcissism themselves. I don't really know. Depends on the kind of narcissism. So I didn't have a lot of friends or deep relationships as a younger person. And when about somewhere in my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, something clicked, and I was able to make what I experienced as very deep and meaningful connections with people. However, I wasn't developing the skills that I needed to maintain them, and I ended up losing them. And for me, that is losing my friends, because it happened kind of at the same time, really suddenly. It was a traumatic event in my life. And it's one I take responsibility for. I made mistakes. I didn't say the right thing. I didn't know all the little nuances that go into interactions with people to keep them healthy and to maintain them. I might have come off as clingy or not or the opposite, and I lost those relationships. And I know that I see it in the context of having narcissist parents and not having guidance. But the loss of those relationships when I was around 18, because those kinds of relationships never existed before. And then once they did, finally, at last, they were suddenly gone. This has been, a traumatic event in my life that has really lasted for years as a source of continued pain. It really was the catalyst for a depression that I fell into, but I really did have the will to want to rise above my depression. I went on this journey of trying to become more self-aware and to heal. But unfortunately, you can't just read books and think and get into that NITI loop, especially when you don't, the problem is you're not able to get out there and to get information from people. And you try to fix that with your NITI loop. So even if you're getting great information from great sources, it just isn't quite enough. You might understand a lot intellectually, but that's just not the same as knowing it from experience. Maybe that's SESI. Now, the way I really truly got out of my depression and on a path toward healing and toward the real hope of self-actualization, not just being okay, or not just surviving, and then not just being okay, but actually on a path where I'm feeling hopeful about self-actualization, is luck. And of course, luck isn't enough. You need effort. But I've never personally had a problem with that. And maybe I've made the mistake of being naive and thinking most people don't have a problem with effort. But I've never had a problem with effort. However, luck was hard to come by. But I ran into a little luck. I was taken in by a person who essentially remothered me. And it wasn't a therapist, it was my biological mother. Because the caregivers with the narcissism were my adopted parents. And my biological mother did not relinquish me because of any personality disorder or psychological issue. It was that she was a teenager who made a mistake. Not a result of any kind of severe issue. People make mistakes, and especially children do. So when she resurfaced in my life, because she had agreed to allow guardianship only to my adoptive parents until I was an adult, she was a very stable and secure person. And, she is of my blood, so theoretically that would help her understand me, possibly, even though, on a side note, she actually has a very different cognitive stack. I'm much more like my biological father in terms of the personality. But she's not a narcissist. She doesn't have a personality disorder. She maybe had a different personality, but she's a solid adult, adapted adult, and loved and cared about me for all the years that we were apart. And she was able to actually re-mother me. It's kind of ironic, right? You think of the birth mother as giving her child away to the adoptive mother that remothers, but was actually the inverse for me, as it turned out. In a relatively short period of time, she was able to give me that intensive guidance that I did not receive from my mother and father. And that was able, in combination of the reading and researching I was doing about different techniques I could use to lift myself up, heal myself, become more self-aware. The combination of being remothered by my birth mother and finding these books and reading this information launched me into the world and put me on a path of healing, and eventually I came to reading about Myers-Briggs, and I'm on what I believe to be a sincere path of self-awareness, developing my functions, healing, forming positive relationships, and I have a sincere hope of self-actualizing. I think right now I'm focusing more on positive functioning, good functioning, sufficient functioning, and I don't want to jump the gun or fall into hubris and just assume that I'm on the path of optimal functioning, but I do have hope that is a real possibility. And it's because of using not just my NI and my TI, but using my FE and sort of using all three of those functions. I have to say that mindfulness was an essential piece of getting myself on the right path. It's like the power of psychology and the social sciences mixed with spirituality and Buddhism. It's like that is kind of a killer combination. That has been an amazing combination in my life. And meditation has had an extremely powerful effect on making me more aware, making me more self-aware, and also summoning the courage to, dare I say, use my SE and getting out there in the world and using mindfulness to tolerate the uncertainties that come along with actually walking the world with all the other types and putting myself out there. So I hope this has helped. Above all, I just want to start a conversation about INFJs who have experienced narcissists, whether that means they've had narcissist parents or they had a traumatic event with a narcissist. They fell into a narcissist relationship. We are highly empathetic and caring individuals, and narcissists love that for their narcissist supply. I just want to start a conversation and let people know that there are other people out there struggling with the same things. The trauma of having narcissist parents, being a female in a patriarchy, finally making meaningful connections and then suddenly losing them. Encountering a person on the other end of the antisocial personality disorder spectrum, as my parents, who were on the milder end, encountering a person on the extreme end who is responsible for my Me Too story. Those are all of the things that make up my trauma. Those are all of my life's trauma. And I continue to deal with the recurring suffering that comes with the memory of that, and sort of, how that tore apart my reality. But I don't think, and now I'm just an armchair psychologist, I'm not an expert, I don't have a degree in psychology. However, I just don't think that any of those things have given me a personality disorder that I suffer from currently. I know that I did, coming out of my parents' home, turning 18 and going to college, I did very shortly after that suffer from social anxiety and depression. I did at points in my childhood and adolescence and early adulthood go in and out of depression, and really throughout the entire time suffer from social anxiety. My defense mechanisms kept me away from staying in depression. Now, as I've said, defense mechanisms as adults are maladaptive, but as children are very adaptive. So when I fell into a depression at 7 years old in second grade, I used fantasy, and I was not depressed when I was able to jump into my escapist fantasies. And the same thing happened in my adolescence and my middle school years, where I fell into very, very, very intense depression, and I was able to use fantasies to really distract myself, pull myself out, and then get involved in other things to kind of keep it at bay and not really show all the symptoms and experiences of depression. And then when I met these friends when I was about 18, I thought all my problems were solved. And then when I lost them, I fell into the biggest depression that I've ever fell into, and it might have also, my other depressions from 7 and from middle school that never truly got dealt with came back, arose up, and added to the depression in my emerging adulthood years, in my early 20s, fresh out of college time. So luckily, in my early 20s, I am now an adult, and I don't have to live with my narcissist parents and be under their rule, be under their tyranny. So, and I have the ability to process more difficult information emotionally and intellectually. So that's where I read. I find psychology and the social sciences. I understand patriarchy and what effect that's had on me, and I combine that with spirituality and Buddhism, and it just combines to make this amazing, powerful force that has made possible my journey to healing and to a hope for self-actualization someday. I couldn't have done it without my mother remothering me, my birth mother remothering me, which is FE, which is it's that break of that NITI loop, because I feel that psychology definitely appeals to the thoughts when you're reading it, at least, and you're not, and the rubber hasn't met the road. Buddhism and spirituality, I think, touch upon all of the functions. Maybe not thinking as much, but sensing, feeling, intuition are all a part of spirituality and Buddhism. All right, those are all my thoughts. This was really fun to make, and I hope that it was useful to watch.